The rain hadn't let up all evening. Inside the Gilded Swan, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, the chandeliers hummed above tables of men who talked in millions and women who wore their net worth around their necks. 26-year-old Era Vance moved between them like a ghost. She'd been on her feet for 11 hours. Her back ached, her shoes were soaked from the walk to work, and Chef Morrow had screamed at her twice through the kitchen pass. Once for a late order, once for existing. But Era kept moving, kept smiling, kept invisible. That was the job. Carry the plates, pour the wine, don't need make eye contact unless they want something. More bread for table 7, Diego muttered as he passed her with a tray of dirty glasses. He was 19, worked 2 jobs, and still smiled more than anyone she knew. And Brennan wants to see you after the rush. Ara's stomach dropped. Greg Brennan, the floor manager, never called you over for good news. The last time he docked her tips for being 4 minutes late. 4 minutes she'd spent on the phone with the hospital billing department, negotiating another extension on $47,000 of debt. Her grandmother's chemotherapy bills. Nana had been dead 11 months, but the debt was very much alive. She delivered the Chilean sea bass to table 14 with practiced grace. 2 men in their 50s were deep in conversation about leverage positions and hostile takeovers, while their wives compared vacation photos. Not one of them looked up. Ara set down the plates, refilled the water glasses, and retreated. She was good at retreating. It was a slow night. The rain had thinned the walk-in crowd, and half her tables sat empty. She pocketed a $12 tip on a $340 bill and didn't let her face change. $12. Some of these people tipped their Uber drivers more than that. She was resetting silverware near the window when the front door opened, letting in a gust of cold October air that made the nearest candles flicker. Ara didn't look up. Guests arrived all evening. There was nothing unusual about one more, but then the room shifted. Conversations paused. Brennan, who had been berating the new hostess at the podium, straightened his tie and crossed the floor so fast he nearly knocked over a water pitcher. "Mr. Thorne, what an honor. We weren't expecting. Of course, your table is always ready. Right this way, sir." Ara glanced at the entrance. The man standing there was tall, early 30s, dark hair plastered to his forehead by rain. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, but it was wrinkled, his tie loosened, collar undone. Julian Thorne didn't look like a billionaire tonight. He looked like a man who'd been running. "Just somewhere quiet, Greg," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but something tight lived underneath it. No private room, just a table. Brennan turned to her with a particular smile he reserved for opportunities. "Ara, Mr. Thorne's table personally. The corner booth. Make sure he has absolutely everything he needs." The way he said everything meant, your job depends on this. Ara led Julian to the corner booth, tucked against exposed brick, separate from the room, private enough for whispered deals. He sat down and placed his phone face down on the table, both hands flat on either side of it like he was holding something in place. "The Chateau Margaux," he said without opening the menu. "Whatever year you have." The Chateau Margaux was $1,200 a bottle. Ara had served it exactly twice in 3 years. She brought the wine, uncorked it, poured a taste. Julian waved the ritual away. "Just pour it." She filled his glass. He didn't touch it. For the next 40 minutes, Julian Thorne sat alone in his corner booth, not eating, not drinking, staring at his phone with an expression recognized, not from restaurants, but from hospital waiting rooms. The face of someone watching something precious slip away. She checked on him twice. Both times he waved her off without looking up. The gesture of a man so deep inside his own crisis that the physical world had become an inconvenience. The Chateau Margaux sat untouched, breathing in the glass, wasted. Ara thought about the $12 tip from table 14 and the $1,200 bottle no one would drink, and felt the familiar arithmetic of inequality that she'd stopped being angry about years ago because anger was a luxury too. His phone rang 3 times. The first call he answered and hung up in under a minute. The second he let ring. The third made his jaw clench so hard she could see the muscles work from across the room. He answered. She couldn't hear the words, only the shift, controlled composure cracking, voice dropping to something worse than shouting. Those files were supposed to be. He stopped, listened. Color drained from his face. When he spoke again, his voice had gone flat. Tell Helen to pull the contingency files, all of them. A pause. What do you mean they're gone? The call ended. Julian stared at the dark screen. Then he brought his fist down on the table hard enough to rattle the untouched wine glass. The Chateau Margaux trembled but didn't spill. He stood, pulled on his coat, threw $300 bills on the table, and walked out into the rain with the urgency of a man whose building was on fire. Ara watched him go. Then she went to clear the table. The wine glass sat untouched, full, catching lamplight like a small red planet. She gathered the bills, wiped down the table, checked under the booth. A habit Brennan drilled into them after a senator left a classified folder under a cushion last year. Her fingers found leather, a wallet tucked into the seam where the cushion met the backrest. Dark crocodile leather, expensive but worn at the edges, softened by years of handling. Rich people replaced things before they showed wear. This one had been kept. She should have taken it to Brennan. Protocol lost items to management. Everyone knew Brennan skimmed cash from lost wallets. Everyone also knew saying so was the fastest way to get fired. She intended to follow the rules. She really did. But the wallet slipped. Her hands were damp and it fell open on the booth seat. The first thing she saw wasn't the fold of $100 bills. Wasn't the black American Express card with Julian A. Thorne in silver. What she saw positioned in the wallet's front window, the place most people keep a photo of their wife or their kids, was a photograph old black and white, though it had probably been color once, faded past recognition. Edges soft with handling, one corner torn. It showed two children standing in front of a wrought iron gate, snow falling around them in thick, blurred flakes. The boy, maybe 9, painfully thin, was unwinding a scarf from his own neck and wrapping it around the smaller girl beside him. The girl, maybe 7, had tangled hair and a gap-toothed smile that hadn't yet learned to hide itself. The girl had a small scar under her chin. Ara's hand went to her own jaw. Her fingers found the ridge of raised skin she'd carried since she was 5. A fall from the fire escape at St. Jude's home for children that the house mother treated with butterfly bandages instead of stitches because stitches cost money and orphans didn't warrant the expense. Her legs went out. She sat in the booth Julian Thorne had just vacated, the leather still warm, and stared at the photograph with a ringing in her ears that drowned out everything. She knew this photo, not this print, but the moment. December 20 years ago, Sister Margaret, the only kind nun at St. Jude's, had taken it with her Polaroid. The boy was Jules, not Julian Thorne, tech billionaire, Forbes cover. Jules, the boy who slept in the bunk above hers, who gave her his tapioca pudding every Thursday because she loved it and he pretended he didn't. Who took a beating from Mr. Hargrove because Ara had been caught reading Past Lights Out and Jules claimed the flashlight was his. Jules, who had made her a promise one winter afternoon by the frozen pond behind St. Jude's, so absurd and so beautiful, she'd carried it like a lit match for years after he disappeared. With trembling fingers, she turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting she recognized with a physical shock, the cramped, left slanting letters of a boy who'd taught himself to write were words that rearranged her entire evening. I promise I'll marry you when I buy a whole fleet of swan boats so we can paddle away from here forever. Ara pressed the photo against her chest. Behind her eyelids, she was 7 again, sitting on the frozen bank at St. Jude's listening to a boy with 2 serious eyes describe an impossible future. She remembered the day clearly. December. The ground was iron hard, and the sky was the color of old paper. The other children were inside because it was too cold, but Jules had pulled her outside by the sleeve. They sat on the frozen bank, breath-making clouds, fingers red and stiff. When I'm rich, Jules had said, and the word when, not if, was everything. I'm going to buy all the swan boats in Boston, not rent them. Buy them and we'll get on one and just keep going past the park, past the city, past everything. You can't paddle a swan boat to the ocean, she told him. Watch me, he'd said, and the certainty in his voice had almost made her believe geography could bend for a 10-year-old's will. He'd seen the swan boats once on a field trip Sister Margaret organized. He talked about them for weeks. The absurd grace of them, The way the petals worked, the giant white swans gliding while families sat inside laughing. For a boy who owned nothing, the idea of owning something that beautiful, something that moved, something that could take you away, it was the most ambitious dream he could conceive. 3 months later, Jules was gone. A couple from Newton, the Thorns, very wealthy, no children, came looking for a boy. Bright, adaptable, presentable. Jules fit. The adoption happened so fast, Ara didn't get to say goodbye. One morning, his bunk was empty, sheets stripped, possessions gone. The space above her felt like a missing tooth. You kept reaching for it, finding nothing. She pressed her hand into the dent his body had left in the mattress every night until it faded. She asked the nuns where he went. They told her to stop being dramatic. She wrote letters to Jules, Newton, Massachusetts. All returned. She scanned faces in crowds for years with a hope that hardened into habit and then into the kind of nothing that passes for acceptance when you're too young to know the difference. And now he'd been sitting 3 feet from her for 40 minutes, and neither of them had known. Brennan's voice sliced through her trance. He was coming toward her, eyes sharp, already reaching. Is that Thorne's wallet? She saw his gaze lock on the cash. He came back for it, she heard herself say. The lie came out smooth, automatic. Right after he left, patted his pockets, turned around, grabbed it. You were in the back. Brennan studied her. Ara held his gaze at St. Jude's. You learned to lie to survive. To the nuns about who broke the window. To Mr. Hargrove about the missing food. To the social workers about whether you were happy. Not a skill she was proud of, but one she was very good at. Fine, Brennan said. Get back to work. She slipped the wallet into her apron. It pressed against her hip like a second heartbeat through the remaining 4 hours of her shift. 4 hours of carrying plates and smiling and pretending the ground hadn't cracked open beneath her. She would find him tomorrow. She would walk into Thorne Dynamics and return the wallet herself. Not for the money, not for the black card, but because tucked inside the most expensive wallet she'd ever held was a 20-year-old photo of a boy wrapping his only scarf around a shivering girl and a promise written in a child's hand that he'd apparently carried from a Worcester orphanage to the top of a glass tower. And she needed to know why. The walk from the Gilded Swan to the tea stop took 20 minutes in good weather. In the rain, with her feet aching and her mind racing, it took 30. By the time she climbed the 4 flights to her studio in Alston, it was past midnight. She hung her coat on the bathroom door, sat on the edge of her bed, and opened the wallet under the harsh light of her bedside lamp. Details she'd missed in the restaurant's dim glow emerged. Jules was thinner than she remembered, collarbones visible above the neckline of a too large sweater. Her own younger self looked feral, chin jutted forward, eyes bright with the particular defiance of a child who has learned the world will not be gentle. She remembered the fall from the fire escape. She'd been climbing to the roof because Jules told her you could see Boston's lights from up there if you squinted. She slipped on the 3rd landing, caught her chin on the railing, and the blood was spectacular. Jules carried her to Sister Margaret instead of the house mother because he knew Margaret would be kind and the house mother would be furious. You're going to have a scar, Sister Margaret had said, pressing a bandage into place. Good, Jules replied, standing guard by the door. Scars mean you survived something. Ara set the photo aside and examined the wallet more carefully. Behind the driver's license, in a slim pocket she almost missed, she found a business card. Marcus Sterling, Thorne Dynamics Board of Directors, on the back in Julian's handwriting. Don't Trust has the St. Jude's files. St. Jude's files. She read it 3 times. She pulled out her phone and searched. Julian Thorne, adopted at age 10 by the Thorns of Newton, built Thorne Dynamics into a 14 billion tech empire. Every profile told the same arc, orphan to billionaire American dream in a bespoke suit, but none of them mentioned St. Jude's by name. None mentioned in Worcester. The orphanage, the cold, the hunger, the beatings, all erased, turned into a single paragraph. Difficult childhood, humble beginnings. Marcus Sterling was harder to find. Board member at Thorne Dynamics, former CFO of the Northeast Children's Welfare Fund. Before that, and here's breath caught, a financial consultant for several state-funded children's homes, including St. Jude's. The connection was there. Sterling had been involved with St. Jude's finances during the years she and Jules had lived there. The years when the food was never enough, the heating was unreliable, and the children's winter clothes were thin as paper, while the administrators drove new cars. She set her alarm for 6 a.m., turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the rain. The wallet sat on her nightstand, heavy with money that wasn't hers, and a photograph that was the most valuable thing in it. Thorn Dynamics occupied 40 floors of glass and steel in the Seaport District. Ara stood on the sidewalk the next morning in her only jeans without holes, a Goodwill sweater, and Nana's canvas jacket, looking up until the building disappeared into cloud. The lobby made it worse. Marble, chrome, ceiling so high that footsteps echoed. Two security guards behind a desk who looked like they'd been hired for their jawlines. "I need to see Julian Thorne," Ara said. "I have something that belongs to him." The guard on the left took in her sweater, her jacket, her damp flat shoes. A micro-expression crossed his face, not hostile, but blank. The look gatekeepers wear when they've already decided you're not worth their time. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's Mr. Thorne doesn't take unscheduled visitors. You can leave the item at the front desk." She imagined the wallet going through Brennan-like hands. The cash counted, the cards returned, the photograph discarded as worthless, sentimental clutter. "I'll wait," Ara said and sat down. 2 hours passed. The lobby traffic was a river of polished shoes and tailored suits. A few people glanced at her with mild curiosity, the way you'd notice a pigeon indoors. Most didn't see her at all. She was losing hope when a commotion erupted near the elevators. A cluster of suits emerged. Not casual individual movement, but the coordinated rush of people responding to a crisis. "The board meeting's been moved to noon," a woman with a tablet set into a Bluetooth earpiece. "Sterling's people are already in the conference room. If he doesn't have the files," the elevator closed, cutting her off. But she heard enough. Sterling board meeting files. Whatever Julian had lost last night was reaching its deadline today. She took out the wallet, not for the photo this time, but to examine it. Running her fingers along the inner lining, she felt an irregularity, a seam slightly undone near the bill compartment. Not torn. Opened and resewn once. She pressed the leather apart and slid her fingers inside. What she pulled out was smaller than her thumbnail. A micro SD card wrapped in electrical tape sewn into the lining with deliberate care. This wasn't something accidentally left behind. This had been concealed on purpose. Behind Julian's driver's license, she'd found a business card the night before. Marcus Sterling, Thorn Dynamics Board of Directors. On the back in Julian's writing, "Don't trust" has the St. Jude's files. St. Jude's files, the orphanage, their orphanage. Without fully understanding why, Ara unclasped the chain around her neck. The locket was cheap, brass, tarnished, the size of a coin. Her mother had left it for her at St. Jude's with a note for Ara when she's old enough. She'd never known her mother. The locket held no photo, just empty space and the ghost of a connection she'd never been able to trace. She opened it, placed the micro SD card inside, and snapped it shut. Tucked the locket back under her sweater. Then she put the wallet back in her bag. She was standing to leave when the lobby doors burst open and Julian Thorne came through them at nearly a run. Same suit as last night, wrinkled, no coat. His eyes swept the lobby, searching chairs, floors, gaps between cushions. He was looking for his wallet. "Excuse me," he said, arriving in front of her. Up close, his eyes were dark brown, bloodshot. "Have you seen a wallet?" "I think I—" He stopped. His gaze had finally landed on her. Not on her clothes, on her chin. Something cracked in his expression. Not the shock of a blow, the shock of recognition fighting through 20 years of change. "I have your wallet," Ara said, holding it out. Julian didn't take it. He stared at her face with an intensity that made the air between them solid. Ara? No one had called her that since she was 10 years old. It was the name Jules had given her because Ara was too long for a girl who climbed fire escapes and stole apples from the kitchen. "Hi, Jules," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended, as though the adult had stepped aside to let the child through. Julian took one step backward, opened his mouth, closed it. Behind him, an elevator dinged. A woman in a headset emerged, calling his name with increasing urgency. Mr. Thorne, the board. Sterling is pushing for the vote. The vulnerability in Julian's face disappeared behind a mask. The kind Ara recognized from her own mirror. The one you build when you can't afford to be seen as you are. The wallet, he said, taking it. His fingers brushed hers. Cold. I have to go right now, but I need Mr. Thorne. The assistant was nearly shouting. He pressed a business card into Ara's hand. Call this number tonight, please. He held her gaze for one more second, a second that contained 20 years, and ran for the elevators. She watched his reflection fracture in the polished steel doors. She looked at the card, below the handwritten number, 2 words in hasty ink, I remember. She didn't call that night, not because she didn't want to, but because at 4:47 p.m., walking through Boston Common, 2 things happened. First, a push notification from the Boston Globe. Thorne Dynamics Board delays CEO vote. Sterling Block demands emergency session. Monday, second, a black SUV pulled to the curb beside her. Tinted window lowered. A heavy-set man, mid-40s, with the particular blandness of someone whose job required him to be forgettable. Miss Vance, we need to talk about the wallet you found. Ara kept walking, pulse accelerating, feet steady. Another orphanage skill. Keep moving when every instinct screams run. I returned it to Mr. Thorne this morning, we're aware. But not everything in the wallet was returned, specifically a storage device concealed in the lining. Ara's hand went involuntarily to the locket under her sweater. She forced it back, but not before the man noticed. His eyes tracked the movement the way a cat tracks a mouse. I don't know about any storage devo. My employer is aware of your financial situation, Miss Vance. The hospital bills, $47,000. We could make that disappear tonight. The specific number, $47,000, sent ice through her. They'd researched her. They knew her debts, her route, her name. The answer is no. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. We'll be in touch. The window rose. The SUV merged into traffic and vanished. Ara stood on the sidewalk, hand against her locket, heart hammering. She walked to the public garden. Not a decision. Her feet just carried her there the way they always did when she needed to think. The swan boats were moored for winter, covered in tarps, rocking in the wind. She sat on a bench facing the water. She'd come here every year on the anniversary of Jules's disappearance from St. Jude's. Not to mourn. Mourning implied a finality she'd never accepted, but to remember. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Don't go home tonight, Julian's voice. No warmth, only urgency. Sterling's people tracked you from my building. I just found out. Yeah, I met them. Charming. They offered to pay my hospital debt in exchange for a storage device I supposedly have. Silence. Then you found the card. It was sewn into your wallet, Jules. Not exactly casual storage. Another silence. When Julian spoke again, the businessman was gone. That card is the only evidence that Marcus Sterling embezzled millions from children's welfare funds, including St. Jude's operating budget over 15 years, surveillance footage, and financial records. I spent 3 years compiling. His people destroyed the backups Thursday night. The card is all that's left. Ara closed her eyes. She thought about the cold at St. Jude's winters when the heating failed and children slept 3 to a bed. Food that was never enough, shoes never replaced. The scar under her chin that should have had stitches. The money that was supposed to keep us warm, she said quietly. He took it. He took it. Used it to build a career that put him on my board. Now he's trying to take my company by framing me for the embezzlement he committed. If I don't have that evidence Monday morning, I lose everything. Why not go to the police? Sterling has people in the Boston PD Financial Crimes Unit. I tried a year ago. Investigation was killed before it started. The board meeting is my only shot. Public exposure in front of the full board and legal counsel. Where he can't bury it. Ara opened her eyes. The swan boats rocked in the wind. The card is safe, she said. I took it out before I gave you the wallet. It's somewhere no one would look. You, what orphanage habit, she said. You hide the important things where nobody expects. The sound Julian made might have been a laugh. You always were the smartest person in any room, Ellie. Don't get sentimental. There are men who know my name following me around Boston. I'd like a plan before dark. Where are you? Ara looked at the boats. Where do you think? A pause, then softly. The public garden by the boats. 15 minutes he was there in 12. She saw him before he saw her crossing the park at a pace between running and walking. Jacket gone, white shirt untucked on one side, the billionaire stripped of his armor. He reached the bench and stopped. They looked at each other across 20 years and the immeasurable distance between a waitress and a man who owned the skyline behind her. You kept the photo, Ara said, in your wallet all this time. Julian sat down, not close, a careful distance that acknowledged both shared history and present strangeness. I kept everything, the photo, the note, a drawing you made me of a horse that looked like a dog. It was a dog. You told me it was a horse. I was 7. I lied about a lot of things at 7. Silence. Then Julian said, I looked for you after the Thorns adopted me for years. Saint. Jude's wouldn't release records. They told my new parents I didn't have any close attachments at the home. The flatness of old pain retold too many times. No close attachments, as if you were furniture I'd forget about. I wrote you letters, Ara said. Jules Newton, Massachusetts. All returned. My name was legally changed within a month. Julian Amadeus Thorne. They wanted a clean start. No ties to the old life. He looked at the water. They just didn't understand that erasing someone's past doesn't give them a future. It gives them a void. The late light painted the garden amber. Around them, joggers and dog walkers moved through their evenings, oblivious to 2 people on a bench, dismantling 20 years of silence. The men who came to me, Ara said, they're not going to stop at offering money, and the board meeting is Monday. Julian nodded. I know. Give me the card and I'll keep you safe. I'll handle Sterling. Ara considered this, the logic of it. Give the card, walk away. Let the billionaire handle the billionaire's problems. Return to her life of double shifts and debt and anonymity. Then she considered the cold, the specific bone-deep cold of St. Jude's in January when the heating failed for the 3rd time, and Mr. Hargrove told them it was a budget issue while wearing a new down jacket. The cold that Sterling's theft had paid for. No, she said, Ellie Sterling stole my childhood. Not metaphorically, literally. Every night I shivered in that dormitory. Every time I went hungry. Every scar that didn't get stitched because there was nothing left in the medical fund. That was him. She turned to face Julian, and the 7-year-old was gone from her voice. You're not doing this alone. We started in that place together, and we finished this together. Julian looked at her for a long time. The golden light caught fine lines around his eyes. Stress, not age. You always were stubborn, he said, and you always tried to do everything yourself. How's that working out? He almost smiled. I lost my wallet, my evidence, and nearly my company in 12 hours. So, not great. Then let me help. Ara unclasped the locket from her neck and held it out. The brass caught the dying light. I need this back. It's the only thing I have from my mother. Julian looked at the locket, then at her. Something in his expression broke open. The look of a man being handed something fragile by the only person in the world he trusted. I'll guard it with my life, he said. Both of them. He reached for the locket. Their fingers touched properly this time. His hand closed around hers around the locket and held. I missed you, Ellie, he said, every single day. Then let's not lose each other again. Starting with not losing this evidence. She placed the locket in his hand. He opened it, saw the micro SD card, and exhaled a breath that seemed to release years. He closed it, held it against his chest, and looked at her with eyes that were, for the first time since the restaurant, completely alive. Monday, he said. We end this Monday. Sunday was the longest day of Ara's life. Julian had insisted she stay at a hotel, not his home, which Sterling might be watching, but a quiet place in Cambridge, booked under another name. She agreed not because she enjoyed being told what to do by a billionaire, but because her Alston apartment had a lock that could be opened with a credit card. She tested it when she moved in. She spent Sunday pacing the hotel room, fielding texts from Diego. Brennan is on a rampage. Where are you? She told him she was fine. She'd explain soon and felt the inadequacy of the promise. How did you explain to a 19-year-old busboy that you'd stumbled into a corporate conspiracy involving your childhood best friend and a micro SD card hidden in your dead mother's locket. At 3, Julian called, voice tight wound with controlled energy. Sterling's filed a formal complaint with the SEC. Says, I've been funneling company funds offshore. It'll hit the news by morning. Any of it true? Not a word, but it doesn't need to be true to destroy me. By the time investigators clear me, Sterling will have taken the board and restructured everything. How did he do it? St. Jude's, tell me everything. Julian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the businessman was gone. He created phantom expenses, maintenance contracts with companies that didn't exist, medical suppliers that were just post office boxes. The state sent $340,000 a year for 57 kids, food, heat, medicine, clothes. Sterling diverted over half through shell accounts. Hargrove was his man on the inside, keeping the administrators quiet. When anyone asked why the heating failed or the food ran short, Hargrove blamed budget cuts from the state, and we believed it. Ara said, we were kids. We thought the state just didn't care about us. The state didn't care either. But that's not why we were cold. We were cold because Sterling was investing our heating money in tech stocks during the dot-com boom. Ara pressed her forehead against the window. The Charles River moved below, gray and indifferent. Do you remember the winter the pipes froze, she asked. 2005. We went 3 weeks without hot water. Sister Margaret boiled water on the stove so the little ones could have warm baths. I remember I was the one carrying the pots upstairs. A pause. I was 10. I didn't know the word embezzlement. I just knew that something was wrong, that there should have been enough, but there never was. I carried that feeling with me. When I finally had the resources to investigate, I hired a forensic accountant. Took 3 years to trace everything back to Sterling, and he found out his mole in my legal department, a junior associate who copied the server location to Sterling's people. They wiped the backups Thursday night, the night you came to the restaurant. I got the call during dinner. Everything gone except the card in my wallet, which you lost, which I lost, and which he saved. Ashra smiled despite everything. At St. Jude's, we learned to hide the important things in places nobody expects. In the cheapest place you own, silence stretched between them, filled with the particular warmth of two people who share a language no one else speaks. Not a language of words, but of experience. Of knowing what it means to be cold without explanation. Of understanding hunger, not as concept, but as companion. Tomorrow morning, Julian said, board session at 9. I need to play the evidence before Sterling calls the vote. And you need a witness. I need someone who can make them understand this wasn't accounting irregularities. These were children's lives. You want me in the room? I'm asking. Last time you asked me something, you were 10, and you asked me to paddle to the ocean with you. You said yes then too. I said you were crazy then too. What time? Monday, 8:47 a.m. The 40th floor of Thorne Dynamics. The boardroom had a mahogany table long enough to land a plane on and leather chairs that cost more than monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. 12 board members filing in. Uniformly polished. Uniformly serious people who had never been told they couldn't enter a room. Among them, Marcus Sterling, shorter than she'd imagined, thinning silver hair, the kind of face that projected trustworthiness, the way a billboard projects an ad aggressively commercially by design. He was shaking hands, murmuring to allies. A man completely at home. Julian appeared beside Ara outside the glass doors, navy suit, jaw set. He looked like the boy who'd once told her he would buy every swan boat in Boston with the same unshakable certainty. Ready? He asked. I'm wearing my restaurant shoes. Ara said, your board is going to think you brought your cleaning lady. Good. Let them underestimate you. He pushed open the doors, every head turned. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian said, before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone. Ara stepped into the room. The weight of 12 powerful gazes landed on her like a physical thing. She felt their assessment, the sweater, the shoes, the canvas jacket, and their instant dismissal. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He recognized her function. The waitress. This is Ara Vance, Julian said. She's a waitress at the Gilded Swan. She earns $263 an hour before tips. She owes $47,000 in medical debt, and she's the reason all of you still have a company to argue about. Sterling stood. This is a board meeting, not a charity event. Sit down, Marcus. The room contracted. Sterling hesitated, then sat. Julian walked to the head of the table, produced the micro SD card, and inserted it into an adapter. For 3 years, I've been investigating financial irregularities involving board member Marcus Sterling. The screen lit up with surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped from an old security system. An office recognized with a visceral lurch. The administrative office at St. Jude's, wood-paneled walls, crucifix above the door she used to stare at during disciplinary meetings. A younger Sterling sat across from Mr. Hargrove. An envelope passed between them. Hargrove counted the bills, nodded, slid a folder across. That folder, Julian said, contains the approved budget for St. Jude's for fiscal year 2006. State allocation $340,000 for food, heating, and medical care for 57 children. Amount that actually reached the home, $112,000. The remaining $228,000 was diverted to Sterling's personal investment portfolio. More footage, more envelopes, spreadsheets tracing money through phantom vendors and shell companies, each leading back to Sterling. 15 years, Julian said. 57 children. Some of us survived. Many didn't. Sterling's composure was eroding. Ara watched it like ice cracking in spring. Inevitable. Irreversible. His smile had frozen into something rigid. His knuckles were white. This is fabricated, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Authenticated by an independent forensic accounting firm, Julian replied. Their report is in your inboxes now. It's also been sent to the Massachusetts Attorney General and 4 news organizations. Phones buzzed, tablets pinged. Sterling's reality was coming apart in real time. Julian turned to Ara. Would you like to tell them what it was like? The room went silent. 12 pairs of eyes on the waitress in the gray sweater. Ara had no speech prepared, no notes. She had only the truth. I lived at St. Jude's from 3 months old to 13, she said. I don't know what the budget was supposed to be. I know what we had. She paused. In winter, the heating failed regularly. We slept in our clothes. When it got bad, 3 to a bed, the older kids wrapping around the younger ones. I was 5 when I fell and cut my chin. She touched the scar. It needed stitches. The house mother used a butterfly bandage because, and I remember her exact words, the medical fund is tapped out this quarter. I was 5 years old, bleeding, and someone had decided my face wasn't worth a needle and thread. She looked at Sterling. He wouldn't meet her eyes. We were hungry most of the time, not the kind when you skip lunch, the kind that sits in your stomach like a stone and makes it hard to think. The older boys stole from the kitchen, and when they were caught, they were beaten by a man who was being paid. She pointed at the frozen frame on screen to look the other way, while the money meant to feed us went into investment accounts. Silence, not discomfort. The silence of people being hit with a reality they couldn't dismiss. Someone in this room took those things from me, Ara said, and he's been sitting at this table for 5 years, making decisions about a company built by one of the children he helped starve. She stopped. The truth was never very long. It just took a long time to be allowed to speak it. Sterling's lawyer leaned forward and whispered urgently. Sterling shook his head. The lawyer whispered again. Sterling stood. I won't dignify. The boardroom door opened. 2 men in suits followed by a woman who carried authority without needing a title. Marcus Sterling, Agent Delgado, FBI Financial Crimes. Please come with us. You have the right to remain silent. Sterling looked around the room at board members who wouldn't meet his gaze. At Julian, standing with his hands in his pockets and no triumph on his face. At her Goodwill sweater holding Nana's canvas jacket. For one moment, his mask fell away completely. Behind it was not evil, just the emptiness of a man who had spent so long taken from others that he had nothing of his own. The agents let him out. The door clicked shut like a period at the end of a very long sentence. After the meeting, Julian walked to the elevator. They rode 40 floors in silence, numbers counting down, like a clock measuring something neither could name. In the lobby, Julian said, I need a few days. Legal process, board transition, press. It's going to be a circus. I know. Ara said, I have a shift at 6. He looked at her as though she'd spoken another language. You don't have to. Diego covered for me all weekend. Brennan will fire him if nobody shows up tonight. The look on Julian's face, the billionaire trying to process a woman choosing a restaurant shift over the extraordinary events of the morning, was the first thing that made her laugh in days. A real laugh startled out of her, breathless and slightly teary. After your shift, Julian said, after my shift, you can buy me coffee. Regular coffee from a regular place. Not a $1,200 bottle of anything. Deal. The aftermath moved fast. The board voted unanimously to keep Julian. The SAEC expanded its investigation. The Massachusetts AG reopened the St. Jude's case. 23 former residents Julian had been tracking for years were contacted about a restitution fund. Ara worked her Monday evening shift. Diego nearly dropped a tray of martinis when he saw her. Where have you been? I told Brennan you had a stomach bug. He didn't believe me. I owe you. Ara said about 14 favors at this point. But who's counting? He grinned, 19 years old and still the most decent person she knew. Brennan glared when she clocked in, but said nothing. He'd heard something secondhand, distorted about his waitress being involved in events at Thorn Dynamics, and rumors made him cautious the way nothing else did. The tables were busy, the wine was expensive, the tips were mediocre. Table 6 left $15 on a $280 bill. The hostess seated a couple at table 3 who didn't look up once during the entire meal. Not when she took their order. Not when she brought their food. Not when she refilled their partner. She was invisible. The uniform did that. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, it didn't sting. Because she knew something the people at table 3 didn't. She knew that invisibility was only permanent if you let it be. She knew that the most important things were hidden where nobody thought to look. In lockets, in wallets, in the quiet girl sitting in the corner that nobody bothered to notice. She finished at midnight, hung up her apron, changed her shoes, walked out the back door. Julian was waiting on the sidewalk, not in a car, on foot in jeans and a jacket, holding 2 cups of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. The sight of a billionaire standing in the drizzle holding Dunkin' Donuts was so deeply, absurdly human that something in Ara's chest unlocked. Something sealed for 20 years. You could have sent a car, she said. Then I wouldn't get to walk with you. She took the coffee, creamed 2 sugars. How did you know how I take it, she asked. I didn't. I got it the way you took your hot chocolate at St. Jude's, 2 packets of sugar from the kitchen, and whatever milk was left. She stared at him. You remember that, Ellie? I remember everything. They walked to the public garden without discussing it. The park was empty at midnight, paths silver with rain and streetlight, air sharp with wet leaves and approaching winter. The swan boats sat in their moorings, covered in tarps, rocking gently, patient and ridiculous and eternal, waiting for a season that hadn't arrived. I have something to show you, Julian said. He pulled out a folded document. Ara opened it under a streetlight, a certificate of ownership stamped and notarized for the entire Boston Public Garden Swanboat concession. You didn't, she said. I made a promise. I was 10. I didn't know what I was promising, but I meant it. She stared at the paper, then at him. Then she started to laugh. Not a polite adult laugh, but the helpless, full-body laugh of a child being told something so absurd, it circled back to wonderful. You bought the swan boats. You actually bought the swan boats. Everyone, we still can't paddle them to the ocean, Jules. I know. He took her hand. His fingers were warm this time and steady, and they fit around hers with the certainty of a gesture rehearsed 10,000 times in imagination and finally performed. The condition of the promise has been met. So I'm asking, not as Julian Thorne, not as a billionaire, as Jules, the kid from St. Jude's, who wrapped his scarf around you in the snow because you were cold and it was the only thing he had. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a copy of the photograph. Not the original, which was in evidence now, but printed on the same matte paper, identical in every detail. 2 children in the snow, one wrapping a scarf around the other. On the back, beneath the faded child's writing, he'd added a new line in adult script. Promise kept. Now let's go. Will you marry me, Ellie? Or looked at the at the boy in it, seemed to be thin and serious, giving away the only warm thing he owned. At the man holding it, who had carried that photo through 20 years, Through adoption and name changes and a fortune built from nothing, through boardrooms and betrayals, through every version of himself, and had never let it go. She thought about the distance between a Worcester orphanage and a midnight bench in Boston. The years of cold and hunger and invisibility and debt and grief. The stubborn, irrational, unbreakable refusal to stop hoping that had carried them both from there to here. On one condition, she said anything. Swan boat ride right now tonight. Julian blinked. They're covered. The season ended in September. It's 40 degrees. And when has that ever stopped us? He looked at her. She looked at him. And then they were both climbing down to the dock, pulling the tarp off the nearest swan boat with the giddy recklessness of children breaking rules they never agreed to follow. Their laughter echoing across the empty park like something that had been held underwater for 20 years and was finally allowed to breathe. Ara climbed into the passenger seat. Julian took the pedals. Together they moved out onto the dark water, slow and absurd and perfect. The city glittered around them. The Hancock Tower rose into clouds. Streetlights made golden ribbons on the water's surface. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. The locket, empty now, its secret delivered, its purpose fulfilled, rested against her chest, warming in the space between heartbeats. "We're not going to make it to the ocean," she said. "I know," Julian said. "I'm going to marry you anyway." "I know that too." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped one arm around her while pedaling with his feet, steering them in slow circles on the dark pond. Two orphans on a swan boat at midnight in October, cold and happy, and finally impossibly home. Above them, the clouds broke apart, and the stars came out small and distant and impossibly bright, wept like promises made in childhood that had somehow against every reasonable expectation come true. 6 months later, the Julian and Era Thorne Foundation for Children's Welfare opened its doors in Worcester, Massachusetts, built on the exact site where St. Jude's once stood. Its motto, chosen by Era, is engraved above the entrance. The most important things are always hidden where no one thinks to look. The swan boats still run every spring in the public garden. But if you look carefully, you'll notice the newest boat has a name painted in small gold letters on its bow. Ellie, if this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe. A new story drops every day.